Forward TV. The world is thinking.
So on my immediate right is Professor Stanley Feldman, who's a Professor of Anaesthetics at Imperial College London, the author of Panic Nation, Unpacking the Myths We're told about Food and Health, and the author of Poison Arrows as well. On my far left is Rob Lyons, who's a writer for Spiked Online, mainly on science, health, and obesity issues. And then on my immediate left is Mike Fitzpatrick, who's a GP, medical author, contributor to The Lancet, and the author of The Tyranny of Health and MMR and Autism. So each speaker is going to speak for just about 10 minutes. The style of this session is as provocation lectures in a sense, or short provocation talks. So there won't be time for public discussion, but if we have time at the end, we might have a bit of discussion on the panel. But they're just going to be 10-minute talks from each of the speakers. So, Stanley.
Thank you. Well, let me first of all congratulate you all on staying the course and being here, because it is quite exhausting, the whole day of lectures. The epidemic of obesity that we're told we're suffering from is the latest in a series of scare stories with which we've been regaled. We're told about the scares about the food we eat, the air we breathe, and the way we live. Do you remember the AIDS 20 years ago? AIDS was going to be the new Black Death. And 10 years ago it was CJD, it was going to kill hundreds of thousands. Last year it was bird flu, was going to kill so many people the army was going to have to be called in to deal with the riots on the street. We are constantly regaled with these scare stories. And in fact, a couple of years ago, a group of medical scientists got together and persuaded Professor Marks and myself to write this book, Panic Nation, to counter to give the scientific truth behind these scare stories. And in fact, Mike Fitzpatrick has written a couple of chapters on it by coincidence. The present subject then is the epidemic of obesity. Is it real? Well, let's start with the one truism about it. The only reason you put on weight is because you're eating more calories than you're using. You're taking in more food than your body is burning. There's no other cause of obesity. If you starve, you'll lose weight. No question about it. Nobody has ever starved and put on weight. And it doesn't matter what you eat. The food is immaterial. People who just drink orange juice can put on weight. The heaviest mammals, the elephant, the hippopotamus, and the whale, are vegetarians. It isn't the particular food you eat that puts on weight. It is the amount you eat. And you cannot get across a more important message than that. It demonstrates really the futility of the emphasis upon a particular foodstuff and the sort of demonizing of things like hamburgers and sausages. And the Food Standards Agency, which has introduced this rather balmy traffic light signal for foods that are fatty and it's trying to persuade the manufacturers to take the fat out of hamburgers and sausages, which means they're going to take the taste out of hamburgers and sausages. It doesn't matter. It's the amount you eat. If you eat a lot of hamburgers, a lot of sausages, you'll put on weight. If you eat a lot of lettuce, you'll also put on weight. You know, if you think about the people who lost weight with the Atkins diet, this was a high-fat diet. It was a terrible diet, physiologically, but people lost weight on it. And there's no particular food that you can incriminate. Well, whilst on the subject of diets, you know, if there was a diet of a particular combination of foodstuffs which regularly made you lose weight and sustain weight loss, we'd only need one diet. We wouldn't need the 30 or 40 diets with which we're given every year. I had dinner with the editor of a Sunday newspaper a little while ago, and I said to him, you know, if there was a good diet, we'd only need one diet. Why does your newspaper publish 12 or 13 diets a year? He says, because it sells newspapers. What we're much more interested in, rather than diet, we're now realizing the importance of things that control appetite. And all the pharmacological and physiological investigation into obesity now is turning towards the gut hormones that cause you to feel hungry and what makes you feel full. And within a few years, we will have pills that will control appetite. And these are not pills that act on the brain, these are pills that simulate the action of food on the gut. Now, is obesity a problem? Well, there's no doubt that there's more fat people about today than there were 10 or 15 years ago. But it's not only in the UK, it's all over the world. People are getting fatter and people are getting taller. We don't see an epidemic of heightism. But you know, if you're over 6'4", it's a threat to your health, just as obesity is a threat to your health. And there's no doubt obesity, by which I will define obesity, that morbid obesity, being 20% above the BMI recommended, maximum BMI recommended for your age and height. If you are above that level, there is no doubt that actuarially you are at increased risk, that your expectation of life is reduced. When you break down obesity, and we have been, about a year or 2 years ago, we had the parliamentary report on childhood obesity that was very alarmist. It had this picture of this baby choking to death on the cover, if you remember. The baby had a congenital disease called the OBOB syndrome, and it had nothing to do with overeating. That report suggested that the children were getting so obese that there were going to be a terrible epidemic of obesity, that the children were not going to live as long as their parents. It is 5% truth and 95% nonsense. If you actually go back to the National Health Audit for 2003, which is extrapolated from a small group of schools, you find that in children under the age of 10, the incidence of obesity is 6.7%. That's not really an epidemic. It's gone up by about almost 0.5% in 5 years. It's in the group from 10 to 15 that the obesity level in children is something like 10 to 15%. And the reason for that, this is what we used to call puppy fat. These are prepubescent children who are putting on weight before they have a growth spurt. And because the BMI exaggerates the effect of height, I mean, if you halve the height, you multiply the BMI by 4. So it exaggerates the effect of height, that these children go in the category of being fat. Are they at risk? Well, I mean, Jamie Oliver will tell you they're filling their arteries with cholesterol and that they're going to die very quickly. It's absolute nonsense. It doesn't do it. There's no evidence it increases the risk of adult heart attack. Only about 20–25% of them will turn out to be fat adults. And as for the instance of type 2 diabetes in children is very, very rare, probably about 10 cases a year. So it's a nuisance. It should be dealt with, but it is not a serious menace to health. The menace to health of obesity comes in the adults. And there is no doubt that adults, people in the 50, particularly 50 to 70 or so age group, that it increases the risk of joint disease, muscle disease, heart disease. It's an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes has a strong genetic link, but there's no doubt it's biased towards fat people. And I say heart disease is commoner in these people. There's also a much higher instance of accidents about the home. So obesity is a threat to health. It's not a disaster, and it's unlikely to cause people to die that much earlier if they look after their diabetes, if they get diabetes. The causes, very briefly, the commonest cause is socioeconomic. The biggest group of obese people are in the lower socioeconomic groups. Some of it's cultural and ethnic. I can remember my grandmother used to come to see, when she came to see me, would say, eat, you're so skinny. There was a belief that the plumpness meant that you were prosperous and that thinness meant you were ill. There was the lifestyle. Unfortunately, today people tend to sit for hours in front of the television, and the consumption of snack foods has gone up 5-fold in the last 10 years, and that contributes towards eating too much. The effect of exercise and obesity has been greatly exaggerated. I saw somewhere that violent sexual intercourse merely uses the amount of energy you get from half a slice of toast. So you see, birds fly, say, 3,000 miles, and birds that fly 3,000 miles only lose 10 to 15% of their body weight, and they don't eat on the journey. So exercise it does have some effect. Regular exercise tends to ratchet up your BMI, your metabolic rate, and so it might help you lose weight, but it's been exaggerated. So the lesson I want to leave you with tonight is you should eat whatever you enjoy as part of a mixed diet, and this includes children. Children should be able to eat whatever they like as part of it. I'm not suggesting you eat children, but I mean, if you're putting on weight, and the best way to know if you're getting too fat is looking at yourself sideways in the mirror. If you've got a pendulous abdomen, you're too fat. If you can't see your toes, you're too fat. Then start eating less. If necessary, cut out a meal. But remember, at the end of the day, the person who is 10% underweight has a shorter life expectancy than somebody who is 10% overweight. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Stanley. Rob.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? When I told a close personal friend of mine that I was going to be speaking in a session called What Next for Fatties, she said, "What, are you the token fat person?" You can judge that for yourself by looking at the rest of the panel. Speaking on a panel with a professor and a GP, I think I won't go too much on the scientific side or the medical side of things, but yeah, I want to play the role of a futurologist. So in that respect, I'm going to take some existing trends and then quite superficially extrapolate them into the future, as any good futurologist would do. So what will we see and what won't we see over the next few years in relation to obesity? Well, we will see is more hysteria about obesity, with more exaggerated claims about how we're going to die young, how our children are going to die young, and so on and so forth. What we won't see is any positive endorsement of being fat. So there won't be any articles in Cosmo saying, hitting the beach, put on those few extra pounds for summer. Or you won't hear conversations like, God, I haven't seen you for ages. Have you put on weight? That extra 2 stone really suits you. In fact, I think it's quite laughable that the government constantly tells us that there isn't enough information out there about food and nutrition and whatever, and what we should do. You know, we're completely bombarded with it, not just from official circles, but constantly in the media, in magazines, and so on and so forth. The social pressure to lose weight and to remain slim is absolutely huge. What we will see more hysterical news stories, which will mean more library footage of grossly overweight people, junk food in hand, waddling down the road, greed personified in their bellies. What we won't see is their faces, for some reason. Apparently being shown on television being overweight is a gross insult, if you'll excuse the pun. But I always wonder why they don't show their faces. It's not as if these people are kind of like going to be getting away with it up till now. Oh, I've been morbidly obese and nobody's noticed, and now I'm on the telly. So not only have we got greed personified by this, but we've also got greed personified but depersonalized by the pixeling out of people's faces. What we will see more programs about fat people, and particularly programs in which browbeaten fatties are harangued into losing weight. I very quickly last night just kind of came up with a list of ones, and apparently, I was talking to Mike earlier on, I've missed one already. There is obviously the creme de la creme, the crowning moment of this genre, which is, I've heard described as belly telly. Which is You Are What You Eat, with the poisonous Dr. Gillian McKeith. But we've also got Honey, We're Killing the Kids, Diet Doctors Inside and Out, Fat Nation, How to Live Longer, Weight of the Nation, Fat Free, Fat Files, Supersized Kids, Supersized Surgery, Fat Families, Chubby Children, Fat Camp. We had Giles Corran's one-off documentary Tax the Fat, Celebrity Fit Club. And by the way, if there's any TV producers here, I've got an idea for a new programme, which is Celebrity Fit Club, but featuring people you've heard of, with the working title Celebrity Fit Club. My favourite title is I Know What You Ate Last Summer. And then there's that ongoing running saw of disparaging people for their inability to control their health, which is GMTV. with very few counterpoints. I did see that the comedian Ricky Grover did a one-off documentary called "Fuck Off, I'm Fat." That's been pretty much it as far as I can see. So that's what we will see. What we won't see is Gillian McKeith and these other belly telly presenters having any qualms about making fat people cry. And in fact, that seems to be one of the central entertainment points of these programmes, particularly You Are What You Eat, is, the point where they break down, they admit their sins, and they promise, once they're confronted with a week's worth of food that they've been eating with all the pies and crisps and whatever, they admit their wrongdoing, and kneel down before Gillian and accept their fate, which is, a pretty horrible fate because it involves a lot of sauerkraut and mung beans, apparently. What we will see more and more shelf space in bookshops being devoted to ever more ludicrous programmes for losing weight. What we won't see is many people losing weight as a result of these programmes. In fact, we probably won't see very many of those people reading the books that they've bought. It's kind of like you've done your penance by simply handing over the cash for it, and which is probably a good thing actually. If you don't read the book, you're probably saving yourself some time, if not any money. What we will see actually overweight and obese people, the majority of overweight and obese people actually, as Stanley was indicating, pretty much living the same length of time as people of normal weight. Interesting figures came out of the United States last year, which indicated that actually some of the people who are categorised as overweight at the moment seem to be living longer than some of the people who are categorised as of ideal weight. And in some ways, I think that makes a bit of sense. If you're in a society where physical labour and actually walking around is less common, but there's no shortage of food, so you never have to go hungry, then I think a healthy person would probably lay down a little bit of extra fat because that's what you're designed to do. So as much as overweight is supposed to be about being unhealthy, actually overweight is probably, being at least moderately overweight, is probably a mark that you are a healthy person in our current environment. What we won't see is, what we will see as well is people dying from various extreme forms of surgery. And that's, while the effect of you being, even very obese means it might knock a few years off of your life. In some of these forms of surgery, at least 1 in 100 people are going to die. So there's a very, very much bigger risk of dying from some of these extreme forms of surgery than those who don't bother with it. On the other hand, ironically, we are going to see people refuse surgery more and more because they are overweight, as happened in East Suffolk at the end of last year, where people were refused hip replacements because they were deemed to be too overweight, and also with the discussion now about fertility treatments and how that should be denied to people who are too overweight as well. What we won't see is the government, health workers, or even millionaire celebrity chefs holding back on increasing interventions into our lives using the excuse of obesity. And we certainly won't see Jamie Oliver making a statement apologising to working class parents for calling them tossers or condemning the packed lunches they prepare for their children as evil. In fact, what we can expect is further vilification of working class people and increased regulation of what they eat, including inspections of lunchboxes and all sorts of things as well. So to summarise, what we will see is the hysteria about obesity continuing apace. And what we won't see, I think it's very unlikely we'll see, is this session being repeated next year with the politically correct title, What Next for People of Stature?
Thanks, Rob. Mike.
Yes, Rob, I'm very sorry not to hear a mention of my favourite television programme of this genre, which is Change the Day That You Die. I know people are familiar with this. It's really brilliant. I strongly recommend it. It's got a website that you can visit to work out your own day of death. Because what it has, there seems to be a thing of these sort of programs. You have a medical scientific expert and a sort of lifestyle guru, diet, exercise type advisor on the other hand. People go on and tell them, they confess their sins about what a disgusting life they lead, and then are told how much this is taking off their life. Not roughly, but the day that they die, it's all worked out, and I've got a little laptop here. I'm a scientist. it's done to mathematical accuracy. You will die on the 14th of August 2037. Oh my God, I thought I was going to live another 50 years. And then you're told how to change your life in order to change this day that you die. It's really interesting, just the whole discourse. One of the things that's very striking to me as a GP, the great evil of medical practice these days is paternalism. I mean, the level of paternalism of these sort of programs is just breathtaking. The level of condescension, the patronising character of them, the offensiveness of the way that people talk to parents about what they're feeding their children would be, do you remember those Doctor in the House, James Robertson Justice, that old style consultant would be regarded as being positively polite and respectful of his patients compared with this sort of discourse that's now considered absolutely acceptable. And I think it's a very interesting how this whole popularisation in the media of these things expresses such a profound disgust for ordinary people, is what it comes down to. Extraordinary. And because I've participated in a few sort of public discussions about this, I've been quite shocked about how people express a sort of hostility to people who are overweight and almost a physical disgust. I was in a radio program a few years ago. I remember they had one of these people on from one of these fat power organisations in the States, and I can't tell you the level of animosity that this woman generated from these other people in this discussion. And I then generated even greater animosity by virtue of being a doctor who didn't endorse this general moralistic sort of message. In fact, this woman said, "I'm going to report you to the General Medical Council for not towing the line on this question. This is an outrageous position to take." What next for fat people? I think the two alternatives here. Either things are going to get worse, which is the kind of scenario Rob outlined, or it's conceivable things should get better. I think the evidence that things may get worse can be seen if we just look across the Atlantic, where these trends are at an earlier stage. And we see this campaign now to ban trans fatty acids in New York City has now become a matter of public edict. The whole labelling thing that Stanley mentioned, codes of practice, bans and prescriptions are the order of the day in relation to this sort of issue, as they've taken hold in the sphere of smoking. Now they're going to extend, obviously, to the sphere of diet and in all forms. That's clearly going to is a likely possibility. The area, of course, where everything takes place first is in relation to children, because you can impose measures against children which wouldn't be tolerated in wider society, then they can be extended, because children are not deemed to be capable of making the kind of choices that adults are supposed to be making. Although adults are not capable of making them either, of course, but it's more possible to bully children in relation to issues of obesity. And so the first stage of this, we've already seen this sort of mass weigh-in of children, which has been took place at the end of the last summer term. And because the government recognised actually that although there's general agreement there's an epidemic of obesity, nobody actually knew whether there was one or not, because nobody has this data on which to make the judgment. So that, well, as we've proclaimed the epidemic of obesity, we might as well measure the kids and see whether it actually corresponds or not. As Stanley says, the figures somewhat undersell the general scale of the panic about it. But you can already see the scope for stigma and discrimination that's likely to follow upon that. And it's quite interesting how immune this whole culture is to scientific evidence. There's a study published in the British Medical Journal only a couple of weeks ago, and quite a systematic intervention study of exercise on school children in Glasgow. A very large number of kids all took exercise and various things were measured. It showed after a long period of time it made no difference to anything. It didn't make any difference to the level of exercise, to their weight, to anything. And it was quite, they interviewed then the president of the British Heart Foundation, which co-sponsored this research, saying, well, this is no reason why we shouldn't continue to promote exercise to children, because we basically know it's a good thing anyway. So you think, well, what's the point, Commissioner, having the research? But that is in the nature of research in this area, that you find, I mean, not in this area, but in general in relation to health promotion, which is endorsed by government, has a high priority in relation to government policy, it is exempted from the requirement to produce evidence. If you take another example, is the 5-a-day fruit and veg campaign. Everybody knows about this. All children should eat 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. You try and find the evidence that that's effective. The evidence doesn't exist. I've written to the Department of Health to get the evidence, and I still can't extract it. They refer in the document that promoted the thing to two papers. You look in the small print, number 13, number 4, I'll get interested, I'll check them out. Internally published documents of the Department of Health. Right to get them, they never will provide them. Big studies in the States have shown that you can't sustain the idea that that provides any preventive or protective value against either coronary heart disease or cancer. So does that mean that the 5-a-day fruit and veg thing has been abandoned? No, it just carries on, has a momentum of its own. So I think, what we can expect is more of the same, because this whole crusade against obesity has acquired the whole a largely political character, and has the endorsement of government at the highest level, and it's dragged in a lot of professional people, who some of whom ought to know better, but many of whom can see it advances a sort of professional agenda, and it's going to provide jobs for a very large number of people, clearly. So that's the rather gloomy scenario, that how things might unfold. How could things get better? Well, I think there are a number of ways that things, and little straws in the wind of things, how things might improve. I think we're seeing the beginnings of a challenge to expose the bad science on which these campaigns are based. And Stanley's illustrated here, a very good book here, that goes through systematically through some of these areas and shows the lack of a scientific basis for many of these campaigns. You only have to look in the Guardian over the last few weeks. Ben Goldacre's Bad Science column has challenged this notion that omega-3, feeding children omega-3 oils, which is the subject of a big promotional campaign in Durham, and he was on the radio program on it yesterday as well. Exposing this notion that if you just feed children omega-3 fatty acids, that this is going to improve their behaviour, their concentration, indeed improve their GCSE performance. The idea is almost so ludicrous that it's difficult to think that anybody would take it seriously without any solid evidence. But nonetheless, that's how it's been promoted. But I think what is very striking about that sort of issue is that, in the public domain, that has to be challenged by somebody like Ben Goldacre in The Guardian. Ben Goldacre's not a scientist, he's a junior hospital doctor, actually, in psychiatry, who has a sideline in journalism. But what I would like to know in this area is, where are the scientists in the area of nutrition who know this is rubbish and are in a much stronger position to challenge it, but sit quietly? And that's a general problem in relation to many scientific. It seems to me that there's a responsibility on scientists in all these areas who should be able to see the abuse of their the area of their discipline in the public realm, but don't feel that it's important that they should come and speak out against it, and it's left to people like Ben Goldacre or other people who may not have the expertise actually that can, frankly, you don't need all that much expertise to see the shallowness of these things, but a bit of expertise is helpful in terms of exposing the science, and I think scientists who are really qualified in those could expose it even more effectively. So I think there's a very important job to be done there, and I think it's only just starting to be done. I think there's on the wider terrain, I think it's, because this is a political campaign, it needs to be challenged politically. If you look at what happened in the last general election, we find Jamie Oliver becomes the most important person in the whole election campaign, endorsed by every political party. Everybody wants to be photographed with him. His campaign to change school lunches is the most important issue facing the nation. And all it needs is for somebody to point out this is ridiculous. The whole idea that the future vitality of the nation depends on what's in children's lunchboxes is ridiculous. And it is no proper area to become the major focus of a general election campaign. School meals have always been rubbish. It never made any difference to the vitality of the nation in the past, or to the quality of education for that matter. But only now it seems that this is the crucial issue that the whole fate of society hinges upon. It is just ridiculous. And it's not that, it seems to me, not that big a political problem for that to be exposed and challenged as a sort of political campaign, and to expose the way in which the gross opportunism of all the mainstream political parties that give somebody like Jamie Oliver, you've got to hand it to him, he's got to take the opportunity when he can, but to make him into this major arbiter of public policy in this area. And so I think there are all sorts of small initiatives that are worth promoting. I never thought in all my life, coming from South Yorkshire, that the women of Rawmarsh would constitute an example to the nation. But those women of Rawmarsh, I played football at Rawmarsh as a kid. We used to always love to go to Rawmarsh because we could always beat them from my school, down the road. And now the women of Rawmarsh are showing the way forward, pushing the bread and dripping through the railings to their children. I think we need to see a bit more of that spirit, and I think we'll be a bit better ahead.
Thanks. As it turns out, we do have some time for some discussion. So I've been put in a slightly difficult position because I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I'll try to a bit anyway. So something that strikes me listening to all of the three great talks is there's a lot of myth busting, which is always valuable and is always kind of puncturing myths is always the first way to go and kind of trying to engage in a rational debate. But trying to look beyond the myths and look at perhaps some of the causes of the panic, which all the three speakers kind of touched upon tangentially. Stanley mentioned how the panic about obesity locks into a whole array of other kind of fears that have been floating around. And it strikes me that obesity isn't the only kind of fixation with the body that exists today. What's particularly striking about the obesity thing is how it coexists alongside a culture of intense kind of the gym bunny culture, the fetish of constant exercise, going on the treadmill. It seems to me the fixation with the body kind of goes far beyond anything to do with obesity. There's something to do with kind of with the sheer kind of physicality and the biological integrity of the human being that goes much beyond simply kind of regulating people's weight. It seems to have a much deeper kind of resonance in contemporary culture. So that would be something I'd be curious to hear what the panelists' thoughts are on that, about A, the causes, and B, how this obesity thing ties in with a whole load of other kind of fixations with the body. The second thing is, in terms of, Mike made the point, a very interesting point, about the way in which children can be used as the cutting edge. It's easy to beat up on children. They can be used as the cutting edge of a lot of these kind of intrusive social engineering public interventions. But it strikes me surely that's a good thing. The fact that children don't decide for themselves, and the fact that we can, that government and we can intervene collectively to shape children's lives for the better, in general is a good thing, and perhaps even for their health. I mean, it was a kind of a classic thing about introducing milk, introducing a certain level of quality of food for working class children in order to raise the overall, in order to raise the kind of overall health and fitness of kids who perhaps weren't able to get that food at home, not reflecting anything negatively on their parents, but simply on the fact their parents were too poor, but belonging to a different kind of, a different generation, which was less wealthy than society is today. So the principle that you can intervene in public health, I suppose what I'm getting at is where do you draw the line? When does legitimate intervention tip over into this kind of overbearing paternalism? That would be things that those would be the thoughts that I'd be interested in hearing what the panel have to say. So let's Rob, should we start with you? Do you have anything in response to any of those points or things that the other speakers have mentioned?
Well, I think it is a political issue, as Mike pointed out, and I think that on the one hand, you can debate the science of these things and say that actually the risks involved are overstated, and also you can make the point that actually the solutions that are put forward are overstated as well. So the usual solution to the problem of obesity is to go on a diet. Well, most diets, in fact, spectacularly fail, and most of the people I know, including myself, who've lost weight over the years, have put the weight straight back on again afterwards. So in terms of a way out of this problem, we don't seem to have actually a very successful strategy to do that. But also, I mean, there is, especially with the issue of Jamie Oliver, I think there is a real problem of autonomy, and we do have to stop allowing these people, self-appointed people, to kind of rule our lives. And I think that at the moment, I think people feel very isolated socially in general, and I think that as a result of that, I think they've allowed these people far too much say. Jamie Oliver, a millionaire chef who actually, if you've looked at him recently, could do with losing a few pounds himself. is in no place to criticise people, especially the kind of people he's specifically criticising, about how they feed their children. Surely they're in the best position to decide. Well, obviously, I'm sure they would all say that they want their kids to eat 5 fruit and vegetables a day and all that stuff. But in reality, just getting your children to eat something is often a success in itself. And if it happens to be crisps and pop and whatever, when you're not there to kind of hit them over the head and say, eat your greens, well, that's what they're going to do. Parents have to make those kind of calls, and they're in the best position to do that. So I think that underlying it, whether the science of obesity and all that aside, I think that central issue of our autonomy to decide how we live our lives is really, really important.
Thanks, Rob. Stanley, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to take up something that Mike said, and that is about the way in which we're being dictated to, about the way we live. Many years ago, a psychiatrist at St Thomas's, Bill Sargent, wrote a book on religious conversion, and he pointed out that the way in which the missionaries worked was they got basically an ignorant population who had never met them. They put the fear of God into them. They say, if you're going to die, you're going to have pestilence, you're going to be impotent, you're infertile, unless you join my club, unless you join my religion. Now we're doing the same thing about our health. We're being told that unless we lose weight, our children are going to die younger than us. Unless we exercise, terrible things are going to happen to us. Unless we eat 5 a day, and we're being dictated to, and the scientific basis for it just isn't there. I mean, you take salt. This is absolute nonsense about the restrictions on salt. Without salt, we'd all die. Salt is essential. And if you've got high blood pressure, we've got very good pills to deal with it, and it's very effective. To come back to Jamie Oliver, and I'm amazed how the television companies employ people who are totally untrained in physiology and nutrition. They call themselves nutritionists. They've had no training in it whatsoever. Jamie Oliver is a cook, a good cook, yes. But he is a cook. He is not there to tell us what causes cholesterol to be laid down in the arteries. He showed an X-ray picture on one of his programs, which was actually of a child with a disease called megacolon, and said, look, school meals constipate people. They call you to vomit feces. I've never seen a child vomit feces. You try making a child eat lettuce if he doesn't like greens. I've known plenty of children who have not touched a green all their life and grown up to normal adults. Well, fairly normal adults. Then you get people like Gillian McCreath. Gillian McCreath has absolutely no qualification for talking about food. I mean, this idea of hers of looking at feces was actually first introduced by George III. He was a copro variant, but he was mad. We knew that. He was also fat. The point is that please be more skeptical about these scare stories. I mean, that's why we wrote the book. I mean, junk food, doesn't matter. A hamburger and an Angus steak enter the bloodstream as the same amino acids. It doesn't matter. And we're being brainwashed by it. And the Food Standard Agency is going along with this for political reasons. Fat children, you watch the next time a politician has a photo opportunity at a school. You won't see any fat children. There aren't many. There are only 6% of the whole population. No, I think that we have to be very careful and be very skeptical about the stories we're told.
Well, one of the interesting themes that recurs throughout these discussions is the idea of, you are what you eat, which is in a way what Phil touched upon. And I think, when you think about it, it is an extraordinarily depressing kind of anti-human sort of notion, because it implies that human beings are basically like animals. Human beings and animals both eat and shit, and that's it. But actually, human beings and are like animals in that respect. But it's only human beings that also produce history as well as making manure. Human beings are not just products of nature; they're also products of society and have an active role in society. I just reviewed a book for Spike last week with the title of "Children Are What You Feed Them," and you start saying, "No, they aren't." children, you know, adults, human beings and animals all feed their young, but it's only human beings that also teach their young to dance and sing and write and read and think and argue and become active members of society. That's an entirely distinctive human activity. And yet we've become a society that's entirely preoccupied with what's in our children's lunch boxes. You know, that is the only thing that seems to matter in the education system. The national curriculum is a matter of no discussion whatsoever, you know. I think it's more interesting to discuss, are the children learning Milton or Shakespeare or how to play cricket or a foreign language that might be something. That's of no interest whatsoever in this public discussion. What's in the lunchbox? And parents are going to be subjected to detailed scrutiny so they know what's in the lunchbox. I mean, that's a grim and depressing kind of narrow sort of outlook that seems to have taken over in society in relation to how we bring up our children. So the only thing that matters in relation to bringing up our children is, do we nurture them at the same level that animals do? I mean, I think we can do better than that.
Thanks, Mike. We're drawing to the close, so just a few concluding thoughts of mine from what I've been listening to, and then I'll take a few final thoughts from the panelists if they have any. But there's a few other things that also strike me listening to it. A number of the speakers have brought up the idea of the moralizing language, and Stanley mentioned how a lot of this kind of anti-fat crusade has distinctly kind of religious overtones. And it strikes me that the language isn't accidental. The idea that it's not simply presenting it as a fact, you know, when we say confess your sins to the obesity expert or the so-called nutritionist, there does seem to be something more than just, it does seem to have something of the status of some kind of quasi-religion. It has that kind of level of irrationality that isn't simply kind of a neat phraseology about talking about the way it operates in contemporary society. It seems to have something which is more deeply rooted, and perhaps is linked to the issue that Rob mentioned about the role of celebrity chefs and the role of celebrities in kind of policing our lives as the new kind of guardians and new kind of occupying this, having all this moral authority that they seem to accrue, regardless of the way they are themselves. So that's something. But also, none of the panelists actually specifically addressed the issue that I asked about about when paternalism kicks in. To what level? It's obviously kind of a fairly abstract question, but it's one I think which is worth asking, because at what level does public intervention, which at one level kind of is always intrusive and has to be intrusive, you think of the kind of the initial mass vaccination campaigns and the way they were. The large numbers of people who treated them as kind of violations of sacred liberties to be kind of hauled off and injected with something in order to guarantee public health. At what level do these interventions tip over into paternalism, and when are they not paternalistic? Do the panelists have any thoughts on that? Stanley?
Yeah, I think we're in an intensely paternalistic society. I mean, we are being told all the time the way we've got to live, how we've got to exercise, what we've got to eat. I mean, Mike talked about the omega-3 fatty acids, the 5 pieces of vegetable and fruit. I talked about the salt. We are being told this. A lot of it is nonsense. This is the difficulty that scientists have, is that when you come up against the government saying one thing and you know it's not true, how do you counter it? I mean, that was the reason we wrote the book, because we hoped this would give some sort of counter to it. But it's very difficult. We are a very paternalistic society. We're relying more and more to the diktats of authority and less to our common sense.
Rob, any final thoughts? I realise we're actually over time, so any quick concluding thoughts? No, sorry. Mike, any concluding thoughts?
Well, very brief. The question of when is public health intervention of a paternalistic character legitimate? And I think Phil's point is right, that any kind of public health policy has a paternalistic element, and I've been an active and ardent promoter of the virtues of the childhood mass immunisation programme. I think where there is incontrovertible evidence of the health benefit of a particular intervention, then I think it can be justified. Although it does have a coercive aspect, there's no escaping from that. But where there is strong scientific evidence that it's beneficial to public health, then I think it's justified. I think the same thing about seatbelts in cars. cars. I think the same thing about wearing crash helmets on motorbikes. I think there is good evidence that those things are effective, and I think it's legitimate that there should be an element of coercion in relation to them. The point about these policies, as Stanley has indicated, is the level of scientific justification for them is just, very, very weak, if to not to say in some cases non-existent. And there's a whole, whether there is evidence in relation to some, there's contentious evidence in relation to others. It's just not strong enough to justify the sort of policies that are being put forward. You know, one of the emeritus professor of medicine in Oxford a few years ago made the point that it was unjustifiable for a government policy to intervene in the dietary habits of the nation on the sort of evidence that was available. You know, there is no strong evidence, for example, about whether a particular diet is beneficial in relation to coronary heart disease, whether it's preventive in relation to diabetes, or preventive in relation to cancer. The evidence just isn't there. If there were evidence that it was justifiable and that it improved health, then I think it would be legitimate. Repent, the end is nigh is the very strong theme in all these things. You know, that's the people are threatened with Armageddon. Your children will die before you of terrible diseases unless you repent and learn the error of your ways, and you're offered salvation if you can change the error of your ways. But it's such a gloomy and grim thing, even by contrast with traditional religion. At least traditional religion offered you pie in the sky when you die, and offers you transcendence, you know. This just offers you a longer and more miserable, flatulent existence.